Tonight's Connecting the Dots radio program focuses on two ladies, Jeanette Finicum and Carol Bundy, who have really brought forward the strength that's necessary for families in the American West because of the sacrifices that they and their families have had to make to preserve private property and grazing leases in the American West. I'm going to really talk tonight about a subject that we've spoken about before, but it's something that we need to reaffirm that is a problem in the American West, and that is certainly UN Agenda 21 and so-called sustainable development. The people that came up with this plan in 1991, 1992 are evil right to the core of their bodies, and they plan to reduce America to pre-Columbian wilderness in more than 50% of our nation. And the only way you can do that is by running average American ranchers and farmers and folks that make a living off the land in the American West, run them off their grazing lands, off their private lands by taking away grazing leases and a number of other things that are necessary for them to be able to make a living in the West. Some people would call this a normal process. It is not, because these people have been the backbone of our country for well over 150 years, and we need to support these families. So with that said, I would like to welcome our guests onto the show. Jeanette, are you on the call right now?
Yes, I am, and I'm sorry to say that Carol won't be able to make it tonight. She is presently driving to the airport and has spent a long day with her attorney, so she's unable to join us on this call. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for being our guest. And Jeanette, I just I want to thank you for all you've done. There was a great article in this quarter's Range magazine, which I subscribed to for many years, and I promote like crazy because, as far as I'm concerned, C.J. Hadley, a British lady who is the editor of Range magazine, has done more to promote American liberty than just about any American I know who has spent their entire life here. And CJ has been putting these articles out for a long time, and the article that I'm referring to is the article referring to you as the matron saint that was written by Todd McFarlane. Anyway, I would like to just ask you if you would like to give a little bit of background on your family, on your life with Lavoy, and maybe a discussion about some of the things that have happened, some of the tragedies that have happened in your family over the last couple of years.
Okay, well, thank you again for having me on, and I'd also like to say thank you to C.J. Hadley and to Todd for writing such a nice article on us. And she is an amazing patriot, an amazing woman. I wish I had in my of her talent, but I'm so grateful that she is working so hard for us in the American way. Our story, you know, my husband and I, we were married for about 23 years. We're yours, mine, and ours, and theirs family. We adopted as well, and we enjoyed family life. My husband was a wonderful husband and father. He believed in God. He was a wonderful son and brother to his family, and he was a great patriot. He worked hard. He was trustworthy. He was a principled man. We did therapeutic foster care for teenage boys for over 18 years, and over those years, he mentored over 60 young men, and he couldn't have been a better role model for them because he sure was able to emulate what a good man is to be like in the home and with his family. And I think that our country is only as strong as our family unit. And so it's really important to help be good role models for these children that come from rough circumstances. And so that's a little bit of our history of our family. We moved to the family ranch area, and I say that his family homesteaded out here in the cane beds area a couple of generations back, and so we moved back after we had worked many years to save up for our own ranch, which we purchased in 2008 and moved to the ranch in 2010. And, you know, as he began to run his own ranch, he was recognizing the BLM interference, or, you know, the unnecessary help that he felt he didn't need. He didn't need their help in managing his own business and in his own ranch. And he began listening to what was happening with Clive and Bundy in the Bundy story. And back in 2014, he drove all night from Salt Lake just to meet Mr. Bundy, to find out for himself what it is that he was standing for, because in the press you don't hear the real story. You just hear a bunch of smearing and name-calling, but you don't hear the truth. And so he met him. He was inspired by him. He thought he was a principled man and a man of honor, and he decided that he wanted to be there to stand with him. And so the very next morning, he was one of the first cowboys to arrive on horse, and he rode that day that the BLM did stand down. Later, you know, after that, he just came right home afterwards. He didn't stay. We had lots to do and lots of work to do of our own. But as time went on that next year, he was wondering to himself, he was, you know, conflicted. You know, I'm signing these BLM contracts, and I don't know that I really believe in doing that. And so he made a decision for himself that he was no longer going to sign BLM contracts, and made a public announcement to the effect in September of 2015, I believe, on the Brian Hyde Show. And at that point, we started seeing some interference. Our water lines were messed with. There was a tracking device put out on our range. There was water that was taken from his tanks when the river was right next to the fire. They came to our tanks and took our water, and then didn't replace it, because they could have easily replaced the water, but they didn't. Just little things like that started happening, and he started documenting all of the different things that he was feeling and what was happening to him out on the range. And you can find those on YouTube under Lavoy Finicum. So that's kind of the history. And then in 2015, actually it was 16, New Year's Day, as we returned from the ranch of branding that night, he received a call from Ryan Bundy inviting him to go up to Oregon to stand in a peaceful demonstration for the Hammond family. And the Hammond family had been through decades of trials with the BLM and the environmentalists up there in the Oregon area, and they had been prosecuted under the Patriot Act, I believe, and prosecuted as terrorists for lighting a back burn to stop a fire that was out of control from engulfing their own property. And I believe the two counts that they were found guilty of, they had burned 1 acre of BLM ground and 100 acres in a separate fire that they lit a back burn to stop. It doesn't go to, you know, it could have kept burning hundreds of thousands of acres. It's unbelievable to me. This is a common practice out in the West to stop the fires. But they wanted that ground. They wanted the Hammond Ranch. They wanted that water. And so they filed charges against Mr. Hammond and his son and they were found guilty under that federal regulation and were sentenced to jail. Well, the judge didn't feel that it was necessary for them to serve much time because he felt it was ridiculous that they had been charged and found guilty. And so he gave them a minimum sentence. The father was to serve 3 months and the son a year, which they did. And then they were released and sent home. But the BLM and the powers that be out there in Oregon were not happy with that. So the government took them back to court because they had gotten a new judge. And the judge ordered that they go back to prison. And because there was a 5-year mandatory minimum, they are back in prison to serve out the remaining 5 years. And that is what the protest, the demonstration was about in Oregon. They were going up there to demonstrate peacefully and responsibly against these innocent men going to jail for terrorist charges. And so that is how my husband ended up there in Oregon.
Okay, well, that's a good background. And Jeanette, I have to say, it was amazing to me that the government, one of our founding principles in our Constitution is the idea of not having to face double jeopardy in the court system, and yet that's exactly what happened with the Hammond family. And
well,
Hank Vogler,
technically, they're saying it isn't double jeopardy because the first judge did not order them to serve the mandatory minimum. And when people don't understand the law, because we're not lawyers, they didn't realize the jury is not informed that there's a 5-year mandatory minimum. Because the judge and the court can withhold any information that they want from the jury, they don't even understand what's going to happen to these innocent people.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And that's why it's so important to have a fully informed jury if you're going to be in a trial situation. Hank Vogler was on our radio show last summer with Judy Boyle, and they talked about the Hammond Ranch because Hank had been friends with the Hammonds for a very long time, and he told the story of how he had suggested to Mr. Hammond that he file for a creek that had running water in it, that he filed for water rights on that, which he did, and that the second that the Hammonds got those water rights, the BLM and the federal agencies were relentless after that in trying to shut them down. And so it's a real tragic event in our American system when so many people are being really evicted off the land through all these policies.
And they're not just being
evicted. Would you talk a little about?
Oh,
I'm sorry. Would you talk a little about the when Lavoy was in Burns, Oregon, and the fact that it was a very peaceful protest, and that there wasn't. I mean, they tried to make everyone that was in Burns out as at Malheur as being a radical of some kind, and in truth, it wasn't that way at all, was it?
No, it wasn't. I believe it was a conspiracy with the media and the powers that be that took control of the narrative right in the first 24 hours, and everybody was on the same page with the same rhetoric: racist, terrorist, anti-government, anarchist, armed militia, armed standoff, all of these buzzwords, all these trigger words, and none of it could have been true. And they were all peaceful. They were exercising their Second Amendment right to bear arms peacefully while exercising their First Amendment right to free speech and to demonstrate peacefully. They were in Malheur, which was a public area, and they were educating. They were educating people who came. They were educating the press why they were there. They were there to exercise and to stand up for the Constitution, and there to help the Hammonds and their plight. They had farmers and ranchers coming in the dead of night to find out why they were there, because they wanted to know for themselves what these men were doing. And when they would come into the refuge, they recognized men of principle, of integrity, of valor. And they recognized that these were educated men, that they were just trying to teach about the Constitution, about property rights. They were trying to help bring attention to the Hammonds plight. And it's not just the Hammonds in the West, as you know. It is all up and down the West Coast. There are little fires brewing, and people are going to jail. It's not just the Hammonds that are in jail. There's Joe Robertson in jail for water on his private property. People's lives are being destroyed. It isn't just about eminent domain or what's better for the whole country. Let's take this and make it a little fun play park for the East Coast. It isn't that. People's lives are being destroyed. People are going to jail, and they're not even guilty of anything more than having something that somebody else wants.
No, I think that's right. That's very right. One of the things that we keep going back to, and I'll just ask you, have you done any studying on the issue of UN Agenda 21? Because all of this sustainability stuff that we've been hearing about for the last 25 years are at the heart of this takeover of the American West and the rewilding of America. Is that a subject that you've gotten familiar with over the last couple of years?
No, I would say in the last 6 months, because I was a housewife and a mother, and I was busy in our own world, and my husband was the one that was becoming, more politically savvy, but now I am learning as my eyes are being opened to what is happening out there. And indeed, I believe that it's true. Yes,
it is. If you look at the basic precepts of UN Agenda 21, and you take a look at what is at the heart of so-called sustainable development, all of these things are being implemented right now in the American West, and frankly, it is absolutely destructive to private property and especially to ranching and farming families in the West, in the dry West.
Right. Producers. Right.
Producers. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Well, would you? I know this is probably very painful to you, but would you talk about Lavoy's time at Malheur and some of the things that they were trying to accomplish by creating dialogue with the adjoining county sheriff and some of the other folks, and how that whole thing kind of fell apart?
Well, yes, like I was saying, they had ranchers coming in to find out for themselves, and they came at night because they were, afraid to be seen by their neighbor. They didn't want to be turned in to the FBI and the BLM and the other agencies that had come into Burns and set up a fortress. And but after a few days, people realized that these men were not a threat, and they started to spread the word that these men were just there to educate people on property rights, to stand for the Hammonds, and to continue to work until the Hammonds had some relief. They were hoping to get them some relief. And so then people started coming during the day, and more people started showing up just to find out for themselves, because nobody can believe what the press is saying anymore, because they're so irresponsible. They're not truthful. They have no integrity anymore, and the American people know it. And so people were driving from across the country to find out for themselves. Now, the men also were traveling in and out of Malheur, into Burns, into John Day, Bend, I believe. They were able to come and go. Nobody was restricted. The FBI, the state police, they never stopped any of us from going in and out of Malheur or coming into town. My husband took me to breakfast. We went to church. There was no sense of fear for me or my children in that regard, because we were able to travel freely. And the people were inviting of Ammon and Ryan and Lavoy because they wanted to hear what was being said. Now, there is the other side of the story, the statists that want you to believe that the whole town was against them, and that's not true. That's not true at all. But the FBI was really good at instilling fear in the hearts and minds of the people there in town by walking around tacked out, armed up the hills, and that is very frightening for people, especially when the rhetoric coming through their television is, one of the militia groups, armed terrorists, on and on with the buzzwords. And so the town was divided in that sense. But the people who had the courage to find out for themselves felt safe. Anyway, so, there was meetings. They had gone out and taught about the Constitution, about property rights, about natural law, and they had another meeting in John Day where there was over 350 people waiting to hear what was going to be said by Ammon and Ryan and Lavoy. And on the way there wasn't a kill stop that had been planned and set up by the authorities, and that is when my husband was killed.
Well, that is an absolute travesty, and we did have Shauna Cox and Bran Thornton on a previous show, and they were, certainly Shauna was witness to that murder, and it was a murder, there's no question about it, and we have footage archived on that, and it doesn't speak very well for the way the government is dealing with let's say the property rights issues in the West. And I think we are at a point right now in this country, Jeanette, where you're absolutely right. We've lost a tremendous amount of credibility, and people are finally beginning to understand that we do not have the rights to our own private property that we had even a few years ago. And
That's
now
right.
It's becoming even more intense than that because we don't have the rights to our own private thoughts anymore.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I know that it's been my experience since my husband was killed. I'm a mother of 12. I'm a grandmother of 25. I am nobody to be worried about, that's for certain, but they are worried. I am being surveilled. I am being watched. I am being followed. There are memos going out to city councils calling me a sovereign citizen terrorist, the wife of a sovereign citizen terrorist, and that's asking to attend the event so that they could raid this particular event, and they were denied. Thank goodness for the level head of that chief of police. I am grateful for that. My grandchildren were present at that particular event, but I was driving to an event, and it was a long drive, so I had the radio on in the car, and I was listening to the FBI director Comey testify. And it got to the part where they were talking about terrorism in the United States, and he was being asked, how many cases are being investigated at this time in the United States? And he said over 2,000 cases were currently being investigated. And out of those 2,000 cases, 300 were non-citizen cases, foreign people that are in the United States.
Foreign
the
terrorists.
Rest, foreign terrorists. The rest are American citizens that are being surveilled. They're being surveilled and accused or thought of to be a terrorist group. And I know from my own experience, when they put that memo out and called me a sovereign citizen terrorist and wanted to squash my First Amendment right to free speech and just to talk about how I loved my husband and what a good man he was, I didn't know what a sovereign citizen terrorist meant. So I went to the FBI website and I looked up their definition of a sovereign citizen terrorist. And it's like 4 pages long. But in some of that definition, some of the words that they use are constitutionalists, involved in the lands movement out in the West. They consider white Western men the number one terrorist threat in America. And it's in their own print. And that is amazing to me, that because we are here, we're in a land right movement, we are in property rights movement, we're considered a terrorist. When our Constitution, that is our right to own property. It's our right.
Absolutely. Not only our right, Jeanette, but it's our duty to defend those rights.
Absolutely. And so I'm just amazed at how things are twisted. And all of us in this country are just so busy. We don't realize how much we have lost and where this is at right now. We really are unaware. I know I am, and I was. My eyes are completely opened. I am amazed at how much we have lost in our freedoms and our abilities to be able to stand and to have our voices heard. We really don't. If they don't want you to speak, they will make sure that you don't. If they want your property, they will take your property. And they will find a way to wear you down, as they are doing with me right now. I'm not even on my own ranch. My cows are on my sister-in-law's range, and they gave her permission to put my cows there within 24 hours because they still will not allow me to go out onto my own range because, for one, they believe that permit died when my husband died. They don't believe that I have the right to inherit that. So they don't believe that it's my property. And all they do is ignore any attempt from my lawyers. They refuse to respond to anything he sends. And what's crazy is that I'm required to appeal to that same agency for review of a decision, and they won't even give me a decision to where I can go litigate. And if I was to, if I didn't go through this process, I could be denied all my rights to litigate in the future. And what's ironic is that the administrative remedy is sought from the very same administrators who have been ignoring and disruptive to me in the first place. I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. And what they are hoping for is to wear me down, to bankrupt me, to make it to the point where my sister-in-law will not want me on her range anymore because my cows are eating her grass. And how long can she manage 2 ranches on one range, right? They'll wear me down to the point where I have to sell out, and then they've won. And this is what they do to every incident that ranchers or farmers or private property owners, if they want that land, they will get it, one way or another.
Yeah. Well, and I know for a fact, and this was why we sure were hoping that Carol could be on the call, the Bundy Ranch, they were the last of 56 or 57 ranchers in their area. Right. They were the last man standing. They were the last people that said, no, we're not going to give up our ranch. We're not going to turn our land over to the BLM. We're going to continue on, and we're going to ranch. And as a result of that, they became public enemy number one.
And all the forces of government, state and federal, are upon this family and all the people that were arrested along with them, Pete Santilli, Todd Engel, all of them are facing the same force upon them. And I have been witness to sitting in these federal courts, and I have been in amazement of how the judge controls all the information flow to this jury, to the juries that are going to be listening to the evidence. They control every bit of the evidence. They only allow certain pieces in. They're very restrictive to the defense. You are guilty until proven innocent. You are not innocent until proven guilty. And the defense, the prosecution has almost complete full reign. And what it is a totally unfair system. And we don't, the American people are completely unaware of that as well.
They are, because they haven't had to face that very court system. And we had also last winter, we had John Lamb on our program, and he talked about the trial in Portland and how manipulated the entire process was. But in spite of that, the jury found those defendants, those 8 defendants, not guilty.
And do you know how mad? Do you know how mad that government is right now with that fact there? They are not going to let that happen again. And those men are, if another jury finds them not guilty, it'll be a miracle, because they're going to control that environment so tightly. I was listening to a little blurb from John today on Facebook. They're controlling even the jury selection. They're going to control how much time is given to the defense versus the prosecution. The prosecution is going to get more time. They're going to get more vetoes. It is amazing. They are going to make it to where the defense has no hope. We need to start standing up. We need to get more involved. And I know we're busy. I know I'm extremely busy. But these poor people are going to go to jail for the rest of their lives for standing up for property rights, which are guaranteed to us in our own Constitution, which is the law of the land. It is not outdated. It is not old-fashioned.
It's the core of our entire system of government. Without private property in the United States, you have nothing.
I know.
Well, Jeanette, I have to tell you that that process is going to require some good county and state elected officials that'll finally stand up and have enough backbone to actually do the right thing. Now, when I was in Salt Lake at several American Lands Council events there, they did have some county commissioners that had that kind of backbone. Actually, I was one of them at one point in time. I am no longer a county commissioner. However, we still have a number of good county commissioners in this country that understand how important private property really is. And those are the people that we need standing up, as well as good, honorable county sheriffs who understand that the county sheriff is the ultimate law enforcement officer in our nation.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience in working with some of the local law enforcement people in your area?
I haven't had any experience in working with any local law enforcement in my area. My sheriff is in Kingman, which is about 5 hours away. So I know that when Lavoy was murdered, the sheriff that was on at that time was not very helpful. We have a new sheriff, but I haven't had an opportunity to even visit with him yet.
Okay, well, we do need those kind of elected officials. We need sheriffs and county commissioners that are willing to stand up for the concept of private property. Without that, we might as well be the Soviet Union.
I know, and I read this book. It's called Erased by Tom DeWeese. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it. In there's this quote from Milan Kundera, and it's from his book of Laughter and Forgetting. And the quote is, "The first step in liquidating a people is to erase its memory, destroy its book, its culture, and its history. Then have somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, invent a new history. Before long, the nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was. The world around it will forget even faster," end quote. And I thought to myself, that's what we're witnessing here in our America. We're witnessing the liquidation of a people and a way of life. We're witnessing the rewriting of history. We're watching monuments being torn down, even if they symbolize something of the past that was negative and harmful. It's still not, I think, should be left there as a reminder of what not to do.
Right,
And
it's our history.
it's our history, and we are being destroyed from within. We don't need Russia or China. We're doing it to ourselves.
Well, and as a matter of fact, I think if you go to communist China right now, they actually have stronger rights in many ways than we have in our own country. And it's absolutely amazing to me that we have destroyed so much of our independence and our culture of property in this country, and yet we can export it to other countries around the world.
I know. It's amazing. I believe that there is hope for this America, because I know that we have so many good patriots in this country, and that is a good word. And I'm tired of them taking these good words, constitutionalist, patriot, freedom lover. I'm tired of watching them redefine what these words mean. I have another quote here from Samuel Adams that I just really love. It says, "If ever a time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." And I believe that to be true today. It doesn't necessarily mean that we patriots have to pick up a gun. It means we have to stand up and start speaking out in a respectful, responsible manner. We have to educate our children. We have to teach them the correct principles. We have to teach them about the Constitution, which is not being taught in our schools anymore. We have such a great work ahead of us. We have so much to do. But it can be done. I do believe that we can persevere and we can make things right. I have hope. I know my husband did.
Well, and Jeanette, I have to tell you that probably your experiences and what's happened to your family has made you a much stronger person, and it is a testimony to the American system that we thought we knew and that we grew up under, and that is the more you try to oppress and suppress the truth, the more likely you're going to create people like yourselves that will stand up and do the right thing no matter what.
I pray that that's true, because we need a lot more of us out here. And I'm saddened by the thought that, my husband had to die for us to get where we are, our family. We were busy just like everyone else. But I am encouraged, even though he is no longer with us, by all of the people who have contacted me and talked with me, sent me cards and letters, sent me gifts, just letting me know how he affected them in his videos, in his interviews on television when they were, the news people were surrounding him all the time, and even from watching the video of his murder. And how could that happen here in America? A man with his hands up in the air. How could he be murdered like that? Well, we know it happens a lot. We just aren't standing up to do anything about it. But I'm encouraged by all the people who said they've woken me up. I'm getting involved. I'm getting involved in my community. I'm educating my children. I'm homeschooling my children. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And that brings hope.
It does. Yeah, and I have to mention Lavoy's book, Only by Blood and Suffering. I read that book a little over a year ago, and I was really impressed with, I can see why the government was terrified of Lavoy, because he was a man of real, true integrity. And, you could see it in the writing in the book. And he really believed in the American system of government and the American way, and really understood the true meaning of our Constitution.
He did, and thank you for mentioning that, and that's very kind of you to say that about his book. I've heard so many wonderful things about his book too, and how it inspired them in so many different ways. And I think one of the ones that has really touched my heart, one of the reviews that was left, was how he said, it's important for you to be the person today who you want to be, because tomorrow after the collapse, you are only that person you've worked your whole life to be. And so it's so important to work every day on refining yourself and being who you want to be, because that's who you will be the day after the collapse. So I don't want to give too much of the book away, but thank you for mentioning it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really good read, and I think our listening audience should, first of all, it's really important to support you and your family. That's certainly a way to do it, is by providing income by selling copies of the book. But it also gives a tremendous amount of insight into the way that Lavoy thought and into the lifestyle of the Western ranchers. And it was really an excellent book. I really did enjoy it. So.
Thank you. He wrote that book in 2013 before he ever heard about Cliven Bundy and before he ever met him. So he had been having, the Spirit was touching him and motivating him in his own thinking and politically thinking. And he says, Jeanette, I just know I have this book inside of me, and I know it can help teach certain principles that I think are really important about our country. I know I could do this. He says, if you will help me with the boys and pick up the slack there, and Tian and Danielle, if you will help me with the ranch, I know I can get this book written, and I know I can sell it. And so he took to writing, and for 6 months we all pitched in as a family and carried a little more of his weight so that he could write every single day, and he had that book written in 6 months. And I can remember certain days coming home and him saying to me, Jeanette, I wrote a whole chapter. The words just flew onto the keyboard. He says, I know that this is inspired of God, and I know he's helping me to write this. And indeed, you feel it. It was hardly edited. And I'm just amazed at how he could write. He's never written a book before. So I'm real proud of him. I'm real proud of his work, and I'm real proud of who he was. And I'm really grateful that I am his wife, and I'm really grateful I had the opportunity to have him as my husband. And I'm grateful that I have the belief system that there's still more to come for us, because I believe I will be with him again. So I have hope there too.
No, I think you're very correct in that. And the thing that really stands out with the writing of that book is that the American West is not dead. The American West is very much alive. And that attitude, that resistance, people don't understand that come from the city or come from the East Coast or someplace that's a real urbanized area. They don't understand that sense of resolve that's a part of the American West, and I doubt that they can ever completely destroy that. And so they better start working with Americans and understanding that all we want is a free country. All we want is to be able to live as free citizens and understand our Constitution and be able to live with the principles that our founders tried to leave with us. Nothing else. Right.
And we should have the right to choose what type of lifestyle we want to live. We should not be regulated into cities. If we want to farm, we should be able to farm. If we want to ranch, we should be able to ranch. We shouldn't be forced into doing something that we don't want to. If we're capable, that's what this, the American dream is just that. You get to dream and become what it is that you're dreaming about. And so whether it's living in the city and becoming a big tycoon or a nurse or a doctor, a lawyer, or a rancher or farmer.
That's your right as an American to choose what you want to do. And it's what my friend Michael Kaufman refers to as we don't want to live in human kennels. And that's exactly what these stack and pack cities are all about, human kennels.
Yeah, how sad. What a sad existence.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, Jeanette, I know one of the things that the BLM and some of the public agencies have created quite a bit of misunderstanding over are the understanding what grazing leases on public lands are and what those leases are to provide as far as grazing and how that was necessary to even get ranchers and farmers to settle in the American West. They needed that grazing, and they needed that as part of the existence of the ranches. And I know that a gentleman that I met down at the American Lands Council by the name of Stephen Rich has written a number of articles about how important it is to keep good, intense, but managed grazing on public lands and how it improves the forage for all the species on that land. Could you talk to our audience in the time that we have left about grazing leases and why they are important that we maintain those for the ranchers in the West?
Well, I'm not the expert to really speak on that, but I can tell you a name of the gentleman who is, and his name is Angus McIntosh, and he would be an excellent guest to have on to explain to the public in reference to that. He does so well. I'm just learning all of it myself. I believe we're allotment owners, and but yeah, I would not be the person to really go into depth on that.
Okay, well, I will try to get Mr. McIntosh on, but I can speak a little bit about it because up here in Montana we use a lot of public lands grazing leases in our area, and it is considered just like private property. I mean, if you own that lease, it's a guarantee that you can put your cattle on that land. And I understand if you have particularly dry years or particular environmental problems that need to be addressed, that's fine. But a lot of the shutting down of these public lands to cattle grazing and things like that has actually made the land much more infertile and has caused a lot more problems than it's actually solved. And I guess I'm going to do the speaking on that because it's been real important to farmers and ranchers in our area for a very long time. And without those grazing leases on public land, there's a lot of the ranchers that couldn't make it.
You know, all I know what you're saying to be true, but all I've experienced is that they are not recognizing my lease any longer since Lavoy was killed. They say it died when he died because the lease was only in his name. But in Arizona, it's a community property state. We purchased that together, my husband and I. I have a loan on it still. I still have to make payments to the bank for what I purchased, that property that I purchased, that water, that grass. And the lease is an application that I fill out and submit to the Bureau of Land Management for the permission to have my cows eat the grass I've already bought and drink the water that I own. And so that's what I understand. And I know that when I filled out my application, because they were requiring me, they considered him to be and the previous permittee, and so they required me to fill out an application, so I did. Yet they will not process my application, and they won't acknowledge that I'm the owner, and they won't allow me to graze on the land, even though their own regulations state that for up to 2 years, and even can file an extension afterwards, after the death of a permittee, you're able to work out whatever discrepancies there might have been and resolve the problem for the next owner, for the inheritors. And they're not even letting me do that as per their own regulations. So they're picking and choosing which regulations they're going to use and follow and which ones they're not. They just don't want me out there at all. They don't want me back on. They want me to go away. And I'm not going to go away. This is not okay, what they're doing. It is not right, what they're doing. They're being bullies.
Well, and it's obvious that they don't want you there, and you're right. They're doing something that, under our normal system of jurisprudence, would be considered totally illegal.
Well, they get to, you're right, but they get to make the laws, they get to choose which ones they're going to follow, and then they get to implement the punishment. For instance, the punishment to me is you can't have your cows on there, and if you put your cows on there, before this is resolved, we will confiscate and impound your cows, and we will arrest you. So I can own this property. I can make payments on it every year, but I can't use it.
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to litigate this and to fight them. And that is another whole can of worms, because that's what they do to somebody like me. I'm a widow. I have no income. I'm running this ranch. I have no job because we no longer do foster care because of the incident. And so with all of these things stacked against me, they're hoping that I will go bankrupt or that I will have to sell.
Well, you hang in there, because we need patriotic Americans like you, and we need our listeners to understand how important it is to support Jeanette and to support the sale of her book, or Lavoy's book, and that is on our website. And I also need to mention the fact that Carol Bundy, I know that one of the things that happened at the Bunkerville and the Bundy standoff was that the BLM went in and destroyed all the water tanks and all the water facilities that were on their land. It was public land, but it was facilities that they had built and they had right to access. And now that's the same area. A lot of the so-called endangered species are dead.
Right. They just want people off the land, and they will use any excuse to get you off, because then when they have control of it, they can do whatever they want. And, you know, the turtle or the fish, you know, or the owl, because it changes from one area to another, they will find something to take it from you.
No, that's right. We've got right now in most of the Great Basin in southwest Montana, we have the sage grouse, which has been called the new spotted owl. And in reality, you're right. All they do is they find a new species that they can try to use as a poster child for their environmental policies. And their environmental policies are not based on science. They're based on one thing, and that's taking away your private property. Jeanette, I would like to give you the last couple of minutes to just talk about some of the things that you're working on, and some of the areas that people can help you, and some of the areas that would support the movement in the western United States to protect grazing rights for cattle and property owners.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for having me on and hearing and listening to our story. I think you've mentioned my husband's book, but you could go to onecowboystandforfreedom.com, and that's our family website. And there is a legal defense fund button on there, so if you want to help out with my battle with the BLM or the wrongful death suit that I am pursuing, that is available there. Also, I know that there is a lot of fundraising going on for the patriots that are incarcerated for their legal funds, and I encourage you to look up those. But I would encourage everyone to dig a little deeper for their information, to go to alternative media, to do more research on the land rights movement out here in the West to find out what the real story is. Even take the time to call some of us out here, either the Hages or the Bundys, the Finicums, the Hage sisters, the Dan sisters. I'm sorry, the Dan sisters, not the Hage sisters, but the Hage family. And then you have Joe Robertson's family, and you have the Hammonds, and the list goes on. There's people in Montana and Texas and Utah, Stanton Gleaves in Utah. You could talk to any of us out here in the West, and we will explain to you the hardships that each one of us are facing out here, and the oppression that's coming down from the federal government and from state government in some instances. And so I encourage you to look deeper for the answers and for the truth, because you're not getting it on Fox News. You're not getting it on CNN, ABC, and all those other stations. They are not giving you the truth. I see the local stations as just, I don't even have TV in my house anymore, but it's just a brainwashing tool to control the instant opinions and thought processes of the people who turn it on. And I really believe that, because I watched it happen firsthand to our family when my husband was murdered. I watched the rhetoric go out there. I watched how it was manipulated, and I watched how they tried to tear down a really honorable, good, loving, God-fearing family man. And so I know what I'm saying to be true, and I implore and I teach.
Jeanette, it sounds like we're having a little difficulty with the phone connection, but with that, I would like to thank you for being our guest today. And I know it took a lot of well, let's call it guts to stand and talk about something that is this important to Americans. And I thank God there are people like you in this country that still are willing to stand and do the right thing. So with that, Kelby, I turn the program over to you, and I will ask our listeners to please join us again next week for another program in Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Thank you, and good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.